Now we're going to discuss, as mentioned from the past discussions, we're going to focus on the triple constraints. So this time we're going to dive in to one of the triple constraints of project management. What are, again, the triple constraints? We have the cost, we have the schedule, and we have the budget. So those four and the integration. Those are the main topics we're going to tackle in these four half Saturday sessions. Okay, scope management. As mentioned also, we have several scope-related processes in the book of knowledge. If you could still recall, we have 5 domains. Again, we have 5 domains: the initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and closing. So within that, except for the initiation, all of those have the integration management. Then again, all of those have processes related to the scope. So we're going to discuss them per domain. Right after that, if we're done, we are going to have workshop in work breakdown structure and scope statement, project scope statement. At least you can practice how to create. I'll just show you an example, then you can create your own based on the project charter that you prepared. Okay, project scope management. For the integration management, we compared it to gears. Now this time, we are comparing it to, what's this? I'm not sure if it looks the same. This is a sniper scope. So for this scope, we're going to compare it, or symbol, we're going to use the symbol of a sniper scopes. Because this is the part of project management processes that is more on setting the vision for the project, citing what is our objectives. So it is more on the definition of what we need to do. So we're going to have it in the sniper scope. Once we hit the target, we hit the scopes of our project or objectives. Okay. Expectedly, again, I think I was able to mention this one. Integration management is chapter 4 of the PM book guide. For chapter 5, it is it covers scope management. So this time, for this topic, we're going to discuss chapter 4. If you're able to get the PM book guide PDF copy, just go to chapter 5 and you will see the scope management. So for this topic, or for this chapter, again, except for the initiation, all the domains have scope management processes. So from this also, we're going to compare what are the product scope and what are the project scope. So these two terms we are going to learn. We're going to try to differentiate from the other. Okay, so product scope and project scope. How are they different and how are they related to each other? Also, we're going to discuss how are we going to collect the project requirements. Okay, then of course we're going to learn how to prepare the scope statements. What are scope statements? And WBS, or work breakdown structure, and WBS dictionary. We're going to, I think I was able to provide on the succeeding slides examples of these documents. Then if you still have time, we're going to try out some of the data analysis that we could use. like mind mapping. Later on, it is in the succeeding slides. Okay, so let's dive in. The first one is the plan scope management. So this time we're going to go inside the planning domain. So if you still remember, during our first session, we discussed the entirety of the PMBOK guide. The entirety, meaning we have gone over all the 5 domains and we discuss in brief all the corresponding processes that is included in that domain. For example, initiation, we have only 2. One is the preparation of the project's charter and coordination with the stakeholder. Then we're going to proceed with the planning. So planning, we have several processes there that involves a scope. The first one, again, just to highlight, this is located, or we got this from chapter 5, and this is the first process that involves scope inside planning. So it is 5.1, plan scope management. So what is plan scope management? From this summarized screenshot, you could see the inputs, the tools and techniques, and the outputs. So these are the ITTO. So one photo, you get more or less the general description of this process. Located from chapter 5, it is the first one. Under the scope process, then this is the name, the plan scope management, meaning it is under the plan domain. If you could still recall our first day discussion. So ITTO, inputs, tools, and techniques. So just to highlight, this is the first process in the plan scope management knowledge area. And planning, again, planning is an iterative process, meaning it is fluid, not rigid, so it is continuous. So expectedly, more of the discussion, most of our discussion, we're going to cover this fluidity, meaning it is, we can go back anytime we need to make the change. Okay, so what are the inputs? Again, since we were able to come up with a project charter in our integration, in our initiation stage or initiation domain, that is going to be the inputs in the preparation of our plan scope management. Then we're going to utilize also the project management plan. What are these project management plan? You can take note. I think, let me check. I think I was not able to provide this. Anyway, you can take note. Some of the examples of project management plan are the quality management plan, the project cycle description. It means the phases of the project. We also need the development approach. It could be waterfall. It could be iterative, adaptive, agile, or hybrid approach, which will affect in the creation of the scope management. So those are the inputs that we need for the scope management plan. Again, just to emphasize, it is an iterative process and it will affect our scope management. So what are the tools and techniques? So again, to complete the inputs, we still have the EEF, or the enterprise environmental factors. I hope you still remember this one. We discussed a lot last meeting. So that is integration. Now we're going to the scope. We still have EEF, or enterprise environmental factors, and OPA. So usually these two comes along together as part of the inputs in any process, majority of the processes you're going to encounter. So if you, again, if you understand or memorize some of these items, then more or less you already have the inputs of majority of the processes. Okay, proceeding with the tools and techniques. Tools and techniques almost the same also from all other processes. So we have the expert judgment. Again, this came from experienced part of the or members of our project. Stakeholders, may it be project team, top management, or the clients, we could expect the expert judgment from them. So we could utilize this as part of our tools and techniques. Also, we have the data analysis. One highlighted example of the data analysis for this one are, I think we usually have two: alternative analysis. So you can take note of that. Alternative analysis, and yeah, I think that's the best analytical tool for this one, data analysis. So what are alternative analysis? From the word alternative, we're going to provide other options. So it is technically an evaluation. It is an evaluation of the different choices available to achieve a particular project management objective. So the keyword here for the data analysis is the option or choice available. So again, it is an analytical comparison. If you have these choices, you're going to compare. So you're going to compare these different factors like, for example, operational costs. You can have also the risk, also the effectiveness, and the shortfalls of these operational capabilities. So if you have these inputs or you have this information, you can compare. So this analysis, we are, again, the root word there we should memorize is alternative or choice. So it's more on, we need to have something to compare to. Another inputs, another tools is tools and techniques, meetings, the conduct of meetings. And for the output, we have two outputs for this process. Planning, process of scope management. We have these two: scope management plan and the requirements management plan. Actually, first day we already discussed this one. If we have the management plan, again, what's that? We refer that one to the rules of the game. It means if we have this document management plan for scope, so these are the rules or the guidelines for scope. Management plan for requirements, these are the rules or guidelines for requirements. Okay, I hope that is clear so far. So we could remember these two. These are the two outputs for this specific process. So I think I got some example of this one. I could send out to you the templates, but we will not fully discuss this. We are just selecting some of the items we're going to discuss in detail so that we could prepare that one in the workshop. Okay. So what are project scope management plan? So this is project scope management plan. It is not creation of scope statement. It is the definition of how a scope is defined, developed, monitored, controlled, and validated. So meaning, the project scope management plan is not the scope statement itself. It is the how. So we're going to address the questions how. How we're going to define the statement, how are we going to develop the scope, how are we going to develop, monitor the scope, control the scope, and validate the scope. So it is answering the word how, okay? So again, it defines how to define a scope, to create a scope statement. So scope management plan is not the project scope itself, but how to create the scope statement, how how WBS will be created, how the scope baseline will be approved or maintained, and how the formal acceptance is going to happen. So although we are dealing with the rules and guidelines for the scope management plan is not the scope itself, okay? So we are simply answering the hows. So what are the relevant inputs? Of course, our project charter, because it is the, what we call it, the top level information that we have, top level documents. And good thing you're able to prepare that one. More or less, we could relate it to our succeeding activities. Also, we also have the EEF and the historical information. So why is it relevant in preparing the scope management plan? Why do we need the environmental factors, enterprise factors, and the historical information? Because some of this information we could refer to as templates, for example, or the EEF, it could be your company's guidelines. So if you already have your guidelines in how to prepare your scope or how to prepare WBS, etc. So the templates is from historical info. The EEF, the guidelines, for example, you have the department who already have this workflow. Okay, this is how we prepare our WBS. This is how we prepare our scope statement. So we could use that one as inputs. So project charter, EEF, and historical information. So what are scope baseline? Scope baselines are scope statement, WBS, and WBS dictionary. So later on, at the end of this workshop, today's workshop, we're going to be able to develop our own WBS. We're going to have an example later. And also WBS dictionary. This is related. We're going to define only the terms that we are using in the WBS, and that is the WBS dictionary. So again, we have the scope statement, we have the WBS, and we have the WBS dictionary. These three, we collectively call scope baselines. So we need to take note of this term since we are still a long way to go in covering all the processes in depth, although that is probably set on a different workshop, already a series of workshops. But baseline, again, last week, I think we were able to highlight some of the change control. It is more on definition of the baseline. Because if you don't have this, again, we cannot identify the risk, we cannot identify the threshold. So if we don't have, if we were not able to set the baseline, we don't have any reference point. So if we don't have any reference point, it is very difficult to manage a project. We cannot compare if we are really successful or not, if we are losing or winning, or are we taking so much risk, etc. Okay, so again, collectively, scope statement, breakdown structure, and dictionary, these are the scope baselines. So going back here, why is it really important to know project charter? Why did we ask you to prepare your own project charter? Because knowing those information, you could, that is initiation, you could get as much as reference so that you can create in detail during the planning stage. Again, it is the high level information that you will be using as we go down to the planning stage, even in the execution and monitoring control. If you still recall, as what we have discussed in the first day, majority of the processes are using the project charter as inputs because those are the main information that the project exists, who's going to be the stakeholders, what's going to be the basic deliverables, etc. Okay, I hope that is clear. Still in the plan scope management, what are the requirements management plan? So why do we need to discuss this? Because from this process, this is one of the two outputs. So requirements management plan, if you still recall the keywords, it means these are the guidelines or the rules of the game when with regards to requirements. So scope could be related to requirements. So after we could come up with our scope statement, scope management plan, we could come up with the requirements management plan, which is under this process as well. So this describes how the requirement, or sorry, this describes how the required activities will be planned, tracked, and reported. These are also the configuration management is already also covered on this one. Because if we're dealing with the requirements, what are the requirements? Most of the time, we are being asked to address the configuration. So it is also included here, the configuration management in our requirements management plan. Also, the requirement prioritization, the metrics, and the requirement traceability metrics or RTM. So again, configuration status, audits and maintenance, changes in scope will affect the configuration management. Okay, configuration management. In the term itself, configuration, if we are trying to, because going back to the definition of a project, what are projects? Those are unique endeavors. What are projects again? It could be services. It could be something new, either an application, object, etc. So for this case, if we have a physical object or a tool that we need to create as part of the project or the expected output of the project, we're going to deal with the configuration of this item, of this object. So for example, in your case, if you're an IT developer or an app developer, we are going to deal with the requirements, and technically we're going to be dealing on which one should be first. Since we have highlighted that many of these are iterations or iterative, meaning at a certain point it could change. It is not totally fixed. Again, don't worry, we will discuss that one later on, the two types of environment. But again, if we're dealing with the requirements management plan, we are dealing with the requirement prioritization. We are also dealing with the metrics. One simple example are the trackers, the timing monitors, etc. So we need these matrices, and these are included in the requirements management plan. And also this one, the RTM. You could take this note. Take note of this term because we will be, when we are discussing scope, specifically in the requirements management plan, definitely this word or this term is could be encountered. The requirement traceability matrix or RTM. We just this is not a big document. It is not a very large document. This is only let's say it is a tabulated, okay, it is a tabulated requirements. So you have the tabulated list of requirements, and included in this tabulation are the specific phases of the project that they are implemented. So you have the requirements and what stage it is going to be utilized. So simply put, that is the RTM, or the requirement traceability matrix. I think I was able to provide a sample on the succeeding slides. Let's see. Okay. So again, in discussing the plan scope management 5.1, meaning it is the first scope process, we need to understand also the difference between the two scopes that we need to focus on as project managers. So these two scopes are product scope and project scopes. Let's see. So what are the difference? Product scopes are dealing with features and functions, while the project scope are dealing with the work to be done, or the work that you need to execute to create the product scope. Okay, I hope that is clear. So we have two scopes, one product, one project. The product are the features and the functions, because again, projects could be um, an initiative, services, and objects. So again, for the product, it is more on the features and the functions, while the project is more on the things we need to do, or the work we need to do to create this product scope. Product scope are description of the characteristics, features, usability that the client, normally client or users, shall receive at the end of the project. Meaning, aside from your project goal, that is part of what we need to accomplish to make this project a success, right? That is part of the goal, either to provide this service or to deliver this product. So again, take note of these key terms. Product scope is features and functions. Okay, while the project scope are the work that we need to do to satisfy the project objectives. Again, this product creation and project objectives. So what are the scope and the project life cycle? So when discussing about scope, um, we could not help but to relate it with the project life cycle as well. Why? Because not all projects are the same, of course, but definitely many projects could be divided further when it comes to its life cycle. So we have two types, usual types of projects when it comes to scope and related to the change, meaning what are the scopes and the life cycle relationship. So for that, we are going to encounter the predictive and the adaptive. Predictive and adaptive. So for the predictive project or predictive environment, the project scope is defined at the start, meaning it is preempted. We already know what are the scope. Most likely, it is going to be straightforward. So one example of this one, predictive, is a construction project. Construction project, you already know when to cast your forms, when to place your rebars, when to cast your foundations, pour in the concrete, then again, when to create the slabs, when to create the columns, another slab, etc. So you already have a fixed scope, stage by stage. One stage could be related to, again, footings or foundations. One stage is related to painting, another stage related to checking of electrical works, plumbing, etc. So that is one example of a predictive project. The scope is clearly defined at the start. And because the scope is clearly defined at the start, most likely this project is resistant to change. So whatever change that we encounter, it really poses difficulties to adjust. Okay, so that is predictive. But what is adaptive? So normally, the project scope for adaptive projects are developed by iterations. So later on, we're going to discuss on this one further. Most of the projects of IT guys, like most of the participants, or all of the participants here, most of the projects that we are dealing with are adaptive. So the scope are developed by iterations, meaning at a certain stage, it could be changed, could be modified, either added something or remove something. So the scope are developed by iterations. At this iterative cycle, we call it. And because of that one, a lot of changes are really expected for adaptive projects. Okay? So for these cases, the client usually describes the requirements, right? Most of the time, the clients, the customers, they are the one describing what I need. Okay, I need this color, I need this weight, this kind of features, etc. In short, most of the time, the customers or the clients are the one defining the project or the product scope because of that statement. The product scope, meaning it is what we are expected. If I'm the client or the customer, I'm expecting these features, this functionality. So in short, I'm describing the product scope. In turn, we create our project scope to match those requirements. So example, the client or the customer already identified these features or these functionalities. So that is considered already our product scope. Then we as the developer or the creator or the builder, we are going to base our project scope on that requirement, on what they need, on what they prescribe, or what they desire. So that's another comparison between product scope and project scope. So as we progress with our project scope, so definitely we were really aiming to comply with this one as we go through our project. As we progress with our project scope, we are also progressing in our product scopes. You see, because based on the needs or the features that is required, or meaning based on the product scopes, we are developing our project scope. So if we are going to work on in accomplishing until 100% of the project scopes, we are also progressively accomplishing until 100% the need or the product specifications or the product scopes that is required from us. These two are what we call symbiotic. They are linked. See, as we progress with the scope, definitely we are progressing with the cycle. Why? Because we're doing our scope so that we can comply with our project objectives and we can comply with the product scope as well. So it is a cycle. It is a symbiotic relationship. It goes hand in hand. Okay? So another thing to discuss when we're discussing plan scope management, the predictive life cycle, we need to highlight that this life cycle or project life cycle, we are planning everything up front. Meaning, when we are saying that our project is predictive, upfront, everything is there. Once we have created the baseline, adverse change is really, really serious because we are more or less fixed. So that our predictive life cycle. project life cycle. But for the adaptive, again, we are going to highlight that it is more on I adapt the scope when the change comes. So again, this is more on iterative cycle, the adaptive. If there's change or there are changes, I'm going to adapt or change the scope. Usually that's the case for the adaptive project life cycle. Okay, the product scope. Again, these are the, okay, I think I already discussed this one. The product scope. Let's see, next slide. Okay. Scopes are, okay, adaptive environment. To fully emphasize, again, we have predictive and we have adaptive project life cycle, or we have adaptive or predictive project environment. So this adaptive environment, the scopes are not defined upfront, as we emphasize again and again. But throughout the adaptive environment cycle, actually this is cycle, not only the environment. Changes will come, we will change our scope. Just the short description of this one. So we are still on the first process. We're still in the plan scope management. Again, if we're discussing this one, we can't help, especially we're able to tackle already the predictive and the adaptive. When we are discussing that, we need to discuss also the concept of the inverted triangle model. So again, the normal triple constraints is a pyramid style, meaning it is triangular. But for the adaptive, it is inverted. So the concept when dealing with the project environment, we have, again, we have two, adaptive and predictive. Just need to understand this, the difference of these two, adaptive and predictive, because our scopes are really affected on this difference. And also, how we're going to deal with the changes are affected as well. Okay. Sorry. So speaking of scope management, we're expected to encounter these terms, adaptive and predictive. Then emerging requirement happens. We have the product backlog prioritization before each iteration of the project. I think you're really familiar with product backlogs. I think these are IT terms. Correct me if I'm wrong, or you can later in the open mic we can share some more with this product backlog. But again, we just want to emphasize that if we're dealing with the adaptive environment, it is more on the changes of this backlog. And these backlog are being, we have lists, right? We have lists, then we have the priorities, which one is to be done first, which one to be next, etc. And most of the time when we are dealing with this one, with these project backlogs or product backlogs, it is more on, I need to finish this list first before the next iteration cycle. So that's one case. But most of the time it is related to requirements that is easily shift or changed. That is for the adaptive. Okay, to discuss further the inverted triangle model, yeah, this one. Again, in discussing the plan scope management, we're going to see this. So we have the normal, we call this triple constraints. So we have the cost, requirements or cost or scope, and the schedule. Usually, the top part for this is the normal one. This is the, you could say the predictive. The requirements or the scopes are on top, and the cost and the schedule are at the bottom. So more or less, predictive processes are waterfall processes. So meaning it's waterfall goes straight down and it doesn't come up. So there's no fluidity on this cycle. It means that the top here, the scope, is more or less the rigid part. Cost and schedule are the flexibles. But for the adaptive process or the agile, it is inverted. So normally, this one is value vision driven. So if you think, okay, I think this one is better, so we could change. Meaning you are really open in changing the features or the scope. This one we just highlighted as features, but again, these are the scopes or requirements as well. If you could see, normally it is controlled by a client, right, or a customer. So at this certain iteration process, when when the stakeholder suggested, most likely we're going to add that one as part of the features. So in short, this inverted triangle is more on, we can really focus on what is the desired scope, what is the desired output, but dependent on the cost and the schedule. So it's going to affect, maybe it's going to have more cost, or it's going to have more time just to come up with this. So when discussing these triple constraints, the time, cost, and scope, or as what we call the iron triangle, the variables, the thing that we need to discuss on this one is, what's the variable? What are the plus alpha, as we call it, on some projects? What are the changing factors? And what are the fixed one? So in this case, the fixed one is the scope on top, and the variables are the cost and schedule. Then, for the predictive, the fixed factor is the scope. But for the adaptive, it is a pyramid upside down. So it is more flexible or more agile. Scope are flexible depending on how much money, how much money, and how much time is available, so that we can come up with this. So more on depending on how much time and how much money. Okay. So again, for adaptive environment and adaptive processes, we have the term backlog grooming. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one. Actually, I just encountered these terms when I'm reading IT related journals or tasks, because I'm more on the civil engineering, structural engineering, construction process guy. But when dealing with IT related projects, we could encounter the term backlog grooming. So what are these? So normally, again, for IT projects, the product owner or the stakeholders own these backlogs. So correct me if I'm wrong, but most of these IT projects, it is controlled or owned by the owners. Then tasks are defined in a specific time frame. So we call it a backlog cycle or iterative cycle. So it is defined in a certain specific time frame at a certain iteration period. But again, in reality, I think everyone would agree, in reality, that most of the time, that when the clients want to add some features or changes, we're definitely going to insert that one in the in that specific iteration cycle. So that is backlog grooming. Again, we also have the backlog refinement. Backlog refinement is more on the prioritization. It is, we have the list of the backlogs, and usually the client or the customer is the one who identifies which one to be prioritized, which one to be um, addressed first. And lastly, the entire project team may participate in the backlog grooming. Although we have highlighted that normally um, the backlogs are controlled or owned by the owner or the client, but the entire team may participate in this initiative, the backlog grooming. Okay, so just to highlight, when we're dealing with plan scope management, we have these two, predictive and adaptive. Normally, predictive are waterfall, which is the normal triangle. On top, or the fixed one, are the scopes or the requirements. Then for the adaptive one, the scope is usually at the middle, meaning below, or it is in the inverted triangle, inverted pyramid, because it is the flexible part. The features or the scopes, and time and money or cost and schedule will just follow. Okay. Okay, proceeding to number 2. So far, any questions? If you have question or
Sir, question.
break time na ba?
The previous slide,
Yes, ma'am. Ito pa.
does it mean ba dito sa adaptive process na yung cost and schedule is fixed? Or
No, no, ma'am. Usually, since we are trying to cover what is the scope, it is going to be impacted by the amount of cost that we have and the amount of schedule that we have. Because most of the time, for the inverted, adaptive, right, ma'am? For the adaptive, for the adaptive, the flexible one or the one we are required to change usually is the scope. But how we're going to address this one is based on how much money we have and how much time we have. So meaning if we have a lot of time, definitely we're going to cover most of the items in our backlogs or in our list scopes. So that it doesn't really mean that it's already fixed, but more or less that is the case. We can address whatever request, but it will be dependent on the time and money that we have. Unlike unlike this one, ma'am, ito talagang fixed yung scope. Talagang fixed yung scope. Most of the time, nagbabari tayo sa, kung may cost impact, then affected itong dalawa, time and schedule natin, time and cost. Because our scope is already fixed. But sa case na to, it is more on the variable is the scope. So more or less, the fixed, not really fixed or the rigid one, but it is more on dependent on the cost and time, how we're going to address the changes in the scope.
So, this adaptive, wala siyang fixed dyan sa adaptive? Hindi, kasi kina-compare ko yung figures niya, yung structure. So, akala ko lang yung predictive is yung nasa taas yung requirement. So, the right side is the cost and schedule ang fixed. Pero now, walang fix dito sa adaptive process. Ganon ba?
Mako-consider siya na fix, ma'am. Pero hindi, unlike dito na ito talagang kapag sinabing fix is hindi mo siya basta-basta ma-change. Kasi because the main definition natin ng adaptive is yun nga, more on changes. Kung ano yung need dito, pwede natin siyang gawin. But ito yung changes na mangyayari. So hindi siya naka-anchor kumbaga. Hindi siya totally naka-anchor dito. More on result-driven siya. It's more on result-driven. Kaya it doesn't matter. Kumbaga, as long as may fund tayo, may time tayo, we can address your concern.
So, yung sa right side is variable din siya, yung cost and schedule.
Pero yun nga, ma'am, more or less talaga siya yung constraints natin. Ang pinaka-flexible lang na part is ito. Nababaliktad. Yung ang flexible na part is yung nasa top for this case, and this one is yung nag-change. So nag-change siya. Meaning estimated lang talaga tong cost dito and ang schedule dito because we have fixed requirement. But for this case, estimated ang scope because nag-change. Ito more or less naka-fix sa atin.
Okay. So medyo kasi parang medyo not clear yung comparison eh. So yung medyo fix yung sa taas ng cost and schedule.
Yes. Yes. Siya yung nagiging constraints natin. Kumbaga, limited tayo.
Sa adaptive or what?
I think
Yes, ma'am.
agile siya kaya pwedeng mabago pa rin. I think may kinalaman yung waterfall and agile kaya pwedeng mabago yung cost and schedule sa agile part.
Yes, pwede siya mabago pero yung kapag sinasabi natin na itong tatlo saan sa kanila ang pinaka less movable or less ang flexibility. It is these two. For the agile, itong dalawa yung less talaga na change. Ito yung pinaka-focus ng variability natin for the agile.
O kaya nga, so ano pa rin, sa agile, may medyo fixed pa din yung cost and schedule. Kaya
Yes,
lang
ma'am.
yung features.
Normally,
pero kasi pag may change yung features, pwedeng mabago kasi yung cost saka schedule eh.
Yes. Kaya for this specific na graphics, we did not really specify na fixed. Ang tinatawag natin constrained siya. Constrained. Meaning, may certain na nag-hold sa kanya pero may movement pa rin. Pwede mo pa rin siya ma-move. Especially for this agile thing. Anyway, may deeper discussion tayo dito sa agile na topic. Maybe several months from now from Doc Ryan. So ito lang, na-highlight lang natin dito, ma'am, yung ano. Ito, flexible yung kanyang scope. Ito, flexible, rigid yung kanyang scope kapag predictive. Yun lang yung na-highlight natin for now. Pero normally talagang may mga impact itong dalawa. Usually we have these impacts on these two.
Thanks.
Okay, ma'am. So, to proceed, okay po ba lahat or you want to take 10 minutes break? Nandito pa si Sir VP John. So it's already 3 o'clock. I think this is slide number 2. I think we still have, let me check. I think we still have 3 more processes for planning until the definition of scope. Then from this, we're going to go to WBS creation. So I think this is the last part of this topic before we proceed to the workshop. Okay, I think we should have a break. Sir Noel?
Okay, sir. Let's have a break muna. So,
okay.
10 minutes or 15?
15 minutes siguro, sir. It's okay.
Okay, so...
Para maka-stretch naman tsaka kape-kape.
So, let's be back at 3:15.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, guys. See you later.
Okay. Saan ba tayo nag-end? Let me check. Okay, let me share my slides. Okay, so next Next topic. Okay, everyone. I hope naka-stretch na tayo ulit. We're going to go a bit fast. I think we still have time, but this is one of the longest topic actually in this scope management discussion. So this is number 2. Again, it is from chapter 5. It is the second process under scope. It is the collection of requirements. So first, we're able to identify our scope. So we could come up with the plan, scope management plan, and the requirement management plan. Then we're going to proceed with how are we going to collect? How are we going to collect these requirements? So we have the ITTO, but this time it's a bit long. So a lot of inputs and a lot of tools. So we have, of course, firstly is the project charter. Second is the project management plan. Next, we have the project documents, we have the business documents, we have agreements, we have EEF or enterprise environmental factors, and we have the OPA. So EEF and OPA. It's 7 inputs because we wanted to so that we can really plan out the best way we can the project, how we're going to execute the project later on. We really wanted to plan it out to cover as much information as we can. So to do that, of course, we're going to go over a lot of documents as well. So again, the project charter, since it is the highest level information that we can get for the project. Next, we have the project management plan. But this project management plan, again, is composed of a lot of documents. So for example, we have the scope management plan, we have the requirements management plan, we also have the stakeholder engagement plan, we have the project documents, we have the assumption logs. Again, we're going to do, I'm going to include this one in the workshop. We're going to do an assumption log. If you notice, many of the processes are using this as inputs aside from the project charter. So it is more or less part of the project management plan. So we'll try to do this. I'm going to give you the template or an example, then you prepare it based on the charter that you have prepared. Also, it is a good practice if we're going to if we really wanted to improve or do well in our project, is to refer on the past projects that we had. What documents we could use? The lessons learned. So that is part also of the item number 2 on the inputs, project management plan documents. You can have the lessons learned. Also, if we have a stakeholder register. Why do we need stakeholder register? Because if you notice, most of the time we do have as part of the tools and techniques the expert judgment. So if we know the list of our stakeholders from that register, we could identify that one. So we could utilize, we could ask them via interview or other data gathering tools and techniques. So that's why we are including the stakeholder register. And number 4, we have the business documents. Why do we need to know, or why do we need to utilize the business documents? Because these business documents, to be specific, the business case, these are composed of the studies that really push more or less the commencement of this project. Why it was granted to really start, because of the feasibility done in a business case. So if we have this information, we could really formulate, because some of the information are in business cases are what are the needs of the customers, what are the current trends, etc. So we could use that one in planning out our approach as well as we go in the execution and monitoring of our project. So we are including that one in the collection of requirements. So again, if we're collecting these requirements, we could utilize as well the agreements between stakeholders, agreement between vendors, etc. Okay, and of course, as what we always discuss, the environmental factors, the one that your company is already practicing, the workflows or the processes that your company is already using. So that is included here. We could have that one as an information, part of the requirement collection or gathering. Okay, so this, if you notice, if you're going to really study all those 49 processes and the ITTO, you will notice that more or less the EEF and OPA are always included. Then, then we have these 8 tools and techniques. Most of this we have discussed already. We will just highlight if we have something unique for this process, so we will highlight that one. So expert judgment, I think by now we are familiar already. What is the expert judgment? Again, quickly getting the expert advices or expert info from stakeholders that have experienced similar case, similar to our project. Then we have also the data gathering. Data gathering, we have discussed again and again. Some of the data gatherings are interview, focus group, discussions, brainstormings, benchmarking, questionnaires, etc. Because at this stage, we are really trying to gather a lot of information. This is the part. We're going to gather a lot of information. So as much as possible, we're going to utilize a lot of inputs and we're going to use a lot of tools and techniques. So for the data gathering alone, we have several. Again, I mentioned we have the brainstorming. We have the interviews, whether it is a one-on-one interview or a group interview. We also have focus group discussion or FGDs. We usually do that. These are moderated. Usually, we have 6 to 12 persons in a room, and we have one neutral moderator. Usually, I was able to conduct this one just a part-time in Cebu, in Bantayan after the Typhoon Hayang, so that we could collect more in-depth feedbacks from the residences. So we conduct FGDs. So we are the moderators. So we can do that as well in gathering information. And another one for the data gathering, FGD, we need to point out that we can group. For example, same discipline, we could group them by like HR staff, engineering staff, project management staff. So we can group that one. We can group them by category, and with that grouping, we could easily relay what information that we wanted to ask them, because they are more or less on the same page, because they belong to the same department or group. So that is FGD or focus group discussion. Another is of course the common one, questionnaires and surveys. You send out a set of questions and let them answer. Then we will record them, use some statistical tools, analysis. We could use that one. Then we could interpret the results. So that is another form of data gathering. Also, benchmarking. These are comparison of 2 or more systems. If we have something to compare to, we can formulate either more ideas, more solutions to this specific thing. So We are using this one during data gathering for our project, requirement collection for our project. So that is benchmarking. Usually, um, this benchmarking is more on organizational comparisons. So what we need that is relevant to our project, then we compare. That's why we have benchmarks set. Also, we have the data analysis. We have document analysis for this one. I mentioned also some of the data we have gathered here, especially the surveys. We also utilize some statistical tools to analyze the data that we have gathered. Then decision making. Decision making, of course, it is more on the role of the top stakeholders. So normally for decision making, we could encounter the terms. Number one, of course, number one is voting. There are a lot of depends on the company or the organization. We have several voting types. So we have unanimity or unanimous decision. We have majority decision, meaning 50%. As long as you get 50% or more, that is majority. Also, we have plurality. Plurality is more or less the same with majority decision, but plurality is more on higher than close to 100, higher than 50, something like that. So plurality, and of course, there's also dictatorship. So that's one voting as well here, part of the decision making. But for this case, in the collection of requirements, we will encounter the term multi-criteria decision analysis. So it is an analysis, one of the tools and techniques for a PMI process to acquire a project team. So multi-criteria. We are basing, because if we're going to create a team, we need to base it not only on one aspect. It is usually different aspect, like which discipline is going to belong, which phase is going to enter, which level, is it a staff level, mid-level, or is he managerial level. So we have multi-criteria. That's why we have this one, especially in specifically using PMI, we have this multi-criteria decision analysis. I'm not sure if I was able to have an example later. We'll see. If not, I will going to send it to you as part of your notes. So again, this multi-criteria decision analysis, we're still in number 4, decision making. We have multiple factors that are organized, and we use a certain matrix to decide. These factors can be weighted by score. The choices are more on qualitative evaluation. So, okay, sorry. So that is number 4, part of the decision making. Then we have the data representation. We have the interpersonal and team skills. We already have discussed this one, the interpersonal and team skills. Also, we have the context diagram. It is more on visuals, context diagram. Then, so for data representation, we have several. So number 5, data representation. Again, these are visuals. So we have, for example, we're going to encounter affinity diagram. I think I have an example in the succeeding slides. This affinity diagram is a tool that gathers a large amount of language data. So like ideas, opinions, then we organize them into groupings and in their natural relationship. So this process, the affinity process here in the data representation, usually used in group ideas generated by group ideas generated by brainstorming. Yeah, generated by brainstorming. Let me check if we have that one here. Yeah, okay. So, so that is data representation. This is an example of a affinity diagram. So we list them down. We list down we list them one by one. Then this one, each of the participants, since it is an output of a brainstorming, brainstorming is we have a certain topic, then you gather your ideas based on whatever pops up. We just list them down. So more on brainstorming. Then we rank them. We rank them by which one we prefer by 1 to 5. So once we list them down, then one part of the group will one member of the group will put this in the whiteboard usually or in a board. Then another set of votation. So you're going to rank it again. So this is one output of a affinity diagram, because we have so much so much factors that you need to consider, like in a situational driver's acceptance. Sorry, nag-echo. Hello? Okay. Then we have culture. Then these are the ideas that we were able to come up. Again, this is an output of brainstorming. So more or less related to group ideas gathered. So that is affinity diagram. Then that is still data representation. Data representation. Next. Okay, interpersonal team skills already discussed. I think we have another diagram. No, sorry. We have, yeah, included also in the data representation. We also have the mind mapping. I think you're familiar in mind mapping if you're able to. Usually, mind mapping, I first encountered this in my project management course in the undergrad. In my BS, we have project management in construction. So I was introduced to mind mapping. It's just like whatever flows in your mind, we have a certain topic at the middle, then it will branch out, like just creating a map of your own. So more on individual works, then you can interpret it in an explanation afterwards. So I think I have an example of a mind map. Yeah, this one. This one I just got from the internet. Actually, one example, but this is very colorful already. Yeah, I also experienced this one when I was able to attend a master's class in project management subject. So we were asked to do a mind mapping as well. So it depends on your style. Normally, what is important is you could branch out from the main topic, like what is time management. So what comes into your mind? I supervise. Then I have these choices. I have this big picture. I have who, what, where, when, etc. So you just simply put it down. Then most of the time you're asked to make it as colorful as this one. But generally, or this one is really more on free flowing, whatever comes out of your mind related to that specific topic. So this is one practice to generate ideas. So again, this is one very good way to collect information for the requirement. So related also to brainstorming, this is mind mapping. Okay, and most of the time, only the author of the mind map or the proponent of the mind map could really explain what it is, because most of the time you're going to have your own creativity, your own unique style. So that is an example of a mind map that is still under data representation. Data representation. So again, only one topic, but a lot of information already. So that is part of the data representation. So we also have in the interpersonal and team skills, we have nominal group techniques, but we will not be dealing with that one because we don't usually do that. And also we could have the context diagram and prototyping. So that is for the tools and techniques. Then the output for this specific process, we have two: the requirements documentation and the requirements, usually these are just the list, and the requirements traceability matrix, or the RTM. So RTM, again, as I have mentioned earlier, RTM are just list of requirements and tabulated, and also the specific project phase that it is going to be utilized. So that is RTM. So for this process, what is important is we're familiar with the inputs, and more or less we could justify why are these relevant to be inputs. Also, what are the possible tools and techniques? As you have noticed by now, all of these processes, we have the ITTO. So that is, if we're going to really take the exam, we need to memorize this, or more or less be very familiar with this, because the questions, the PMP exam questions are not direct to the point. It is more on situational. But anyway, I'm just introducing it to you, and later on we'll just reinforce until we really more or less get it by heart. Okay. Next, so this is a collection of requirements. Collect requirements. So an example of affinity diagram. Again, part of a data representation. Then mind mapping. Usually, you really need to be creative in submitting this. Anyway, okay. So this is an example of the requirement traceability matrix. So this is what one of the outputs for collect requirement process, which is process number 2 for planning under scope. Okay, so example we have here overall project. So as the main requirements, then we have the sub requirements, the service and payment. So this one is just an example. I think, yeah, you have the name. It is an online shopping system. Dated here, completion date here. Then a bit of a description. So later on, we will ask you to prepare this as well, so that we could practice what we learned in the previously discussed, or just we just discussed the 5.2, the collect requirement process. But what you're going to prepare, you could actually follow this template, or if you have your own in your company, or you could search for a better one in the internet, from the internet, then it's okay. But I'm going to send you, I think I have that one from our class with Doc Ryan. I'm going to send it out to you, so you could just simply fill out. Not necessarily to complete it, but at least you're going to have the requirements and the stage. It should have the phase and the status. Okay, so this is one example of, again, the requirement traceability matrix. Okay, any questions for this process? Let's see. So you already have your charter. Then this will take a lot of time, so we will not ask you to prepare an affinity diagram, but definitely we will ask you to prepare a requirement traceability matrix. This is a good practice, actually. This is a good practice for monitoring as well when we are already in the execution stage. We have similar document in our project now, but we don't call it traceability matrix. But anyway, it is a good practice if you have this one, then we could relate this in the charter. So this is part of your activity. I just give the instruction later on. Okay, if no questions, let's proceed to process number 3. Again, we are still at the planning domain under the scope. Okay, scope process knowledge. So we have chapter 5. Chapter 5 is scope. We have the third one, the third process is define scope. So for the inputs, we have the project charter, we have the project management plan. Again, a lot of information. I think we were able to cover this one in the first day of our webinar series. But there are a lot of documents for the management plan. So we could utilize the scope management plan, which expectedly we already have in the first process. Scope management plan. We also have, we're still in number 2. We also have the project documents. We also have assumption logs. Assumption log is part, again, it is one of the documents that are mentioned again and again. So most probably we're going to prepare that one as well. It is a simple document only. It's not necessarily to complete the entire set. So that is part of the project management plan. And also we have the requirements documents. If you remember, you already, once you're done with process number 2, you could prepare already the requirement management plan. Same with the scope management plan. So that is included here in item number 2. Part are the requirements management plan. And also the risk register. So the risk register. If you notice, some of the documents actually were not yet prepared, but how come it is part of an inputs of this process or other processes? Because we are really we're emphasizing the fluidity of this project. So let's say at this stage, the documents that I have mentioned are not yet prepared. Definitely in the future, once you update this, the definition of scope process, more or less you already have those documents. So that's the thing, because it's fluid. We're expecting that once it is prepared, later part of the planning process, you could use that one as an input as you develop again, or you develop further your scope statements. So also the EEF and OPA. So these are part of the inputs as well. Again, I think we are always highlighting this. We have the organizational culture, we have the personnel administration, the marketplace condition. So we could have that one in the definition of our scope. And for the processes or organizational processes or OPA, we have the policies and procedures. We also have project files from previous projects, so we could use them. So those are examples of OPA. Okay, then proceeding with the with tools and techniques. So of course, expert judgment, data analysis. So for data analysis, we could use also the one that we highlighted earlier, the multi-criteria decision analysis. Then we have also for decision making. Decision making, again, we have the votation. We described earlier the types of voting to decide. Okay, that's one example. Then interpersonal and team skills. This one we have highlighted last meeting already. Then product analysis, because we're defining scope more or less, scope or the product scope. So if we need the product scope, we need to develop that one to define. We also need the product analysis. So I think I haven't highlighted what are the product analysis that we have, but it has several. Then I'm going to send it out to you after this discussion. Okay, to focus on the output, so we're done with I, T, T, and now it is in the output or O, ITTO. Only two outputs. We have the project scope statement. So after going through this third process, the definition of scope, we're expected to be able to create or to have our own project scope statement. So we're going to ask you from your charter, we're going to prepare again. We will include the scope statement. So at least two processes we could practice. Then another output, of course, the document updates. Once we're going through a process, expectedly, because of again the fluidity of this flow, we are expected to have updates on several documents, project documents that we have by now at this certain stage. So we have the assumption logs. So if there's any updates, we're going to update that one. The requirements documentation, the output of the previous process, the RTM, the requirement traceability matrix. So you need to update that one here as well. Then the stakeholder register. So if you see another one or another part of the team or another stakeholder or vendor, you update the register. So, okay. So again, we'll include this one. The RTM, the risk, the requirements, traceability matrix. We're going to prepare also the scope statement and the WBS. I think the WBS will be coming shortly. Okay. Assumption log. Okay, that's why I have highlighted here an example of an assumptions log. So very simple. This one is a very simple format. I want you to, we're going to ask you to try this one from your charter. So you'll get a very good project. You were able to prepare and come up with a very nice project charter. So we will develop further. We will use those information to have our assumptions log. So normally we have here the project manager, the project sponsor. ID depends on you. Normally each company, each project has their own standard for this. Then we have the project title. I don't know if you could see it. Anyway, you can zoom in once I gave you the slides. So project title. And these are examples. So you have ID, you have category and description. Then who's the responsible party or the in charge, who's going to be in charge of this assumptions log item. So we have the due date, when to act, we have the actions validated, etc. Okay, and also you have the status. Normally these three, valid, not valid, open. So example of the category, I think this is a construction project. So we have category for infra. So data center setup, I think this is IT. Yeah, this is for IT example again. February 28, no good for data migration. Team to engineers, etc. Okay, these are just example. You can create your own. From the template that I'm going to send, I think there are descriptions. Just an example. So same thing, you can assume also because these are assumptions log. Meaning, same with the risk registers. Normally, we are keen or we are careful also in dealing with the assumptions log because more or less, these assumptions are equivalent to risks. So if we're going to discuss further in the near future regarding the risk management, we will find out or we will connect that some of the risks in our risk register are actually some of the items also in our assumptions log. That's why we're dealing this we're treating this as one of the important information as well. Okay. Then, okay, part of the definition of scope, we are defining the project scope statement. So what are scope statements? These are developed detailed description of the project and the product. So we already have we know how to validate, how to monitor. We identified that one in the scope management plan earlier, right? So this time, the how is already answered. Then for this third process, we're going to prepare the exact scope statements or the product scope. So we have the detailed description already. Then we describe the product, the services, and the results. Normally, if you notice, these are the definition of a project. A project could be an output for product, for a new service, or expected results. Then, the establishment of acceptance criteria and boundaries. It's really important. Okay, you already identified your scope, and you already identified also your product scope. You have your product scope related to your project scope and vice versa. So you have identified your product scope, your project scope. Now you need to state what are your scope actually, because you know how to approach them by having your scope management plan, because that is the how. Now, if we list down the scopes, more or less, these are the objectives. For example, the primary objective is to come up with an application, then you could break it down there. So that is part of the scope statement. But it doesn't end there. You already know your scope. You already know how to tackle or how to go through with the execution process of this of your project to make it successful, or to comply, to satisfy those aforementioned scopes. But we need to prepare also the acceptance criteria. When these criteria are met, we could say that our project is already done. We need to identify that one here in the scope statement. For example, if your application that you're creating already surpasses the certain level during this time frame, then you could say that is already acceptable. So you need to really identify that one. So we have an example of this, but what we're just trying to highlight is it's not only about definition of your scope. It's not only about how you're going to go over this to accomplish and satisfy the scopes, but you need also to identify and define, establish whatever criteria for the acceptance. So sometimes it is more on boundary, like at this stage, no more changes on this aspect. From this stage, if there's changes, I'm going to ask more money, something like that. So we need to identify this already. Okay. Also when defining our scope statement or project scope statement, we should take note that we should be able to identify what should be included and what should then be included. So because we're setting boundaries, we're setting these criteria. So my scope is until here. Beyond that, whether either you provide me additional fund, or it's going to cost me additional man hour or additional Mondays, or this timeline is going to be stretched. So you need to identify this. Okay. Okay, so this is one example of a project scope statement. Again, basing on the information that you have, especially if you're able to create already the project charter, you're able to create also your project scope management plan, your traceability matrix, your scope statement could follow. So this is one example. We have a format. We're going to send it out to you as well. It's really a good practice, especially if you have an upcoming project. More or less, the stakeholders would be impressed if you have these documents ready. And aside from that, it's really quite useful in managing your upcoming projects. So just take note, we'll just try our best to apply the inputs and the tools and techniques. Every project varies, so some of the projects it is not applicable, or sometimes we cannot use them or not available. But what is important is it is there. It is listed out for us by PMI, and it is up to us if it is applicable to our project, we could use them or not. So we will prepare this. We will ask you to prepare for your project, the one that you have used, in the project charter preparation. Okay, example, we have the scope description. I think some of these info are redundant. I mean, repeated already, so it's okay. Then we will compile after, then to be submitted, not next meeting. More or less, I think, okay, we'll just decide later. I will just give the info. Okay, so normally the scope statement have this one, the project name, the project sponsor, the PM, and the revision dates. This is really important because we are particular with the revisions of the documents. We could trace those changes, and sometimes we could refer to them also, and we do refer to these documents if a certain issue arises. So it's a good thing if we have this, and we religiously monitor and update. So different company uses different templates, or maybe they're using a different name. So at least if we have this, we could practice. So scope description, project deliverables, we have the acceptance criteria, the one that we have mentioned. We need to have this one already. Example is the scope description, what are included in the scope. So that's why we have highlighted that one earlier. What is to be included and what are the items to be included. But it is a good thing if you could think of those items. Sorry. If you could think of those items as you prepare your scope statement, because you could immediately identify them that, okay, we're expecting to have this, but it is not part of the scope. So if ever our client, our customer, or our stakeholders would be requesting, we are ready, we are anticipating. So that is a good thing if you have out of scope and you have the in scope identified. Okay, then same as the charter, you also have the project deliverables, so you can copy that one. And aside from the scope description, the in scope and out scope, the acceptance criteria. For example, the project will be accepted when it is agreed by the sales team that the deliverables met their needs. These deliverables are signed off, meaning the documents are signed by all the signatories. Also, the project will also be considered a success if post-launch testing shows that customer satisfaction is over 5 points, higher than where it is now. So that's part of the criteria. You have your baseline, you have your benchmark, you have this target level. If you have established that, then you can declare if my output is higher than that, it is considered a success. Or if everything is delivered, it is considered a success. So it depends on what is really your project. Then from your project, definitely you should understand what is your project, right? So you could develop your charter. Then from your charter, we're going to have better understanding of how to approach and how to make your project a success. Then with this acceptance criteria, you can really say that upon handing over, I'm done with the project, or the project is considered a success with this. You can have this one not in paragraph form. You can also have it in bullet. We normally, in our company, we have usually by Roman numerals because we also have underscore. If example for phasing, example we have phase 1, we're going to deliver this area until this point, from point A to point B. So we identify that one. So we have sub items, and it's still mentioned in the acceptance criteria. And we need to have also the constraints and assumptions. This is one reason. Actually, the assumptions are, example, a sales team and the full project team will be available to co-create the WBS. So you can have this one as well because this is a general practice. You can state this one, but normally assumptions we have more than one. We can have also a statement. So it depends. Depends on your creativity or if it is the actual project, then it depends on what's your target. Okay, so we'll be preparing our project scope statement for the project that you have prepared. Okay, anything else to highlight on this? Okay, I think we could proceed with the fourth process. Okay, we still have time. I think I'll just finish the discussion first. Then I just send out same as last time. Then you can prepare it by group. Prepare it by group. Then do a short presentation next meeting. Because we're still, we're already in the work breakdown structure. Okay. Work breakdown structure. This is the fourth. Again, it is in chapter 5, covering the scope. And this is the fourth process. We're still in the planning domain. The creation of the WBS. Okay. 5.1 is scope management plan. Then we collect requirements. Then number 3 is the definition of our project scope. Define project scope, and this is number 4. Upon the definition of our project scope, we could create our WBS, or the work breakdown structure. I think majority of us was able to see already, or were able to encounter what are the WBS. It's just like a org chart, just like an org chart. Okay. So this is the creation of work breakdown structure, the fourth process of under scope. So what are the inputs? We have the project management plan. We have the project documents. Oh, we have the project documents. These project documents could include the one that we have prepared earlier, our project scope statement. Yes, we're going to use that one as inputs for this process. And also the requirements documentation, the requirements. So those are documents that we could use as inputs for the preparation of our work breakdown structure. Because if you know the requirements, we could identify also the sub-activities. And if we know the scope from our scope statement, we could identify the sub-activities. Then, of course, the EEF and OPA. The EEF and the OPA. Then for the tools and techniques, we have expert judgment. All of us already knows this by now. And number 2, decomposition. So decomposition, literally when we die, we decompose into our smallest parts. But for this project management scenario, we have the general activities. We have those scope we need to accomplish them. So we need to break them down strategically. Breaking down into sub-activities, then eventually into the smallest part of our work breakdown structures, which we usually call the work package, the work packages. So that is the tools and techniques we need to apply to create the work breakdown structure, the decomposition. And we have the outputs. Only outputs for this process, we have two. We develop the scope baseline and develop the project document updates. Actually, it's not developed. We are updating the existing documents that we have. So example of these project documents that we need to update are the assumption log. So for if you already know how to prepare, as what I have said, at least list down 5 is okay, as long as you prepare your assumption log. Then after this process, expectedly, you're going to update those documents. And also the requirements directory. So you have those two. What are the scope baseline? What are the scope baseline? What are this decomposition? Okay, so for the work breakdown structure is essentially the composition of your project scope. For example, my scope is to build a house. So I need to decompose them part by part with activities. So most probably I will consider the disciplines involved. So I could break it down into several parts. I think that's the example I have here. Okay. So this is one example of a work breakdown structure. It is a decomposition or breaking down of the project scope. And the smallest part, we call them as the work package. So when we say decomposition of the project scope, we are really subdividing based on the project work that we need to execute. So if you still recall earlier, the how is the project management plan. That is how we're going to execute. And also, the product scope are the features. The project scope are the work that you need to do, right? So we already identified those. So for us to be able to prepare our work breakdown structure, we should be able to understand what is our project. Do we have a product? What are the things that I need to do to accomplish or to make that product? So with that, I already have my project scope. If I already have my project scope, then I was able to gather more information through the process of collecting these requirements. And also I could prepare also those, the approaches I need. Then I could prepare the scope management plan. And eventually I could prepare my breakdown structure. I could divide them. Okay, for the specific example, the project scope is a construction repair works. So I'm sorry, I don't have the example for the IT, but I could provide that one as well. But anyway, we'll focus on this just to highlight based on this goal or this project scope of repair works. I need to repair something. These are the 4 sub-activities that I could think of. Number 1, the project definition. Number 2, the detailed design and tender. Maybe the project definition is more on the documentation. Like you already prepared your charter, the information, this one. So next, another sub-activity I have is possible I need drawings. I cannot simply go there and do the hacking or do the breaking down of these items. I need to have a plan. I need to have a detailed drawings and tender. Usually tender is more on the bidding. Bidding the time, these are the approach I'm going to do. So once it is awarded to me, then that is the one I'm going to execute. Also, if I have a project for repair, definitely I'm going to have a sub-activity construction. So I already have my projects, I already have my drawings or designs, and the execution, the construction. Also, I could have a post-project or project closeout. So these are the main activities that I have for this scope. Then I could break it down further. The project definition, we could have specification meetings and development of project management deliverables. And for the tenders, we have these 4 items. Same with the construction, I have these sub-activities. So if you could identify your goals or your scope, and you already know your strategy, you could really break down your activities into these packages. So that from general to detail. So that is the goal of work breakdown structure. It is more on decomposition. Okay, it is more on subdivision of the project work from smallest, from big items or activities to the smallest item or work packages. So that is a work breakdown structure. Later on, I will give you examples, sample templates, and sample work breakdown structures as your reference, because again, we're going to let your team prepare your own work breakdown structure. So these are process of decomposing project scope. These are deliverables oriented. So this activity orientated. Anyway, so you have your scope and you know the activities from general until the detail. So it is whether it's activity 1, you have sub-activity 1.1, you can still have 1.1.1 and so on. Okay, so better the detail, the better. Meaning you are covering a lot of items as you approach your project. Okay. Because if it is too general, there are still a lot of details that you cannot cover, then it is not really convincing that, oh, could this team really execute this project? They could not even identify the details for this aspect, for this aspect. So the more you know, the more you understand your project, the more you understand your scope, and the more you know the limitation or the boundaries that you have set, then you can really break down your sub-activities or your scope into sub-activities and work packages. So again, these are not activities list only. So we have major components of scope baseline. I think I have a slide identifying what is this scope baseline. Yeah, I have that one on these earlier slides. We have mentioning again and again what are the scope baseline. So scope baseline are 3 items. Our scope statement, our WBS, this one. Our scope statement, our WBS, and our WBS dictionary. WBS dictionary are just simply the definition of terms of the one that you have used in your WBS. So those are your baseline. So again, major components of the scope baseline. So these are your WBS. Then the project planning tools, you could also include that one. The main input for you to have a very effective or a very comprehensive and nice WBS, aside from knowing what is your scope and your limitations or your acceptance criteria or the boundaries, you should be able to know a lot or a lot of planning activities that is involved in that one. So the inputs technically of your WBS are the approaches, your approaches, how you're going to approach this project into completion. So that's why many planning tools, many planning inputs or activities are really utilized. Again, these are with your WBS at one glance. You can tell the story of your project. It is a visualization of your project because you already have, from this, you already have what is the general part of the project, what are the sub-activities to the smallest detail here. Okay, so with WBS, you can visualize your entire project. Next, define what's in the scope. Yeah, because if you're going to prepare your WBS, since it is an activity of decomposition, you could really highlight, okay, this is part of my scope. Oh, wait, how come I wasn't able to identify this one? Then I could change the document. Or, oh no, I don't think this activity is part. So you could omit something like that. Because you have a very good visuals of your project. That's what I said again. A very effective WBS is could really tell you the story of what's going to happen for that project. So as early as this stage, the planning stage of considering only the scope, you could already picture out your project. Because later on, once you have established this one, see, once you have defined what is in your scope, you could prepare more or less for the scope changes because you have identified them, you have understood them. These are my sub-activities, these are the smallest package that I'm expecting because we're planning. Then later on, once we go to the next set of processes, which is on schedule, it is related to what we have prepared in the WBS. So we have the sub-activities. Then later on, let's add the timing. Okay, I already have the activities. How about the timing, the hierarchy, etc. So that's the item we're going to cover next meeting in the schedule management. And right after, we're going to add the costing. So from your WBS, so hopefully you could prepare this one for next meeting because WBS, we're going to add the schedule. We're going to have the timeline. Too bad we don't have much time because normally if we have the WBS already, I could share with you some quick techniques in using the MS projects or Primavera. Just a short demonstration of one of your project. If you already identified the schedule, you can generate it there. Also, you can key in the manpower, the resources later on. But anyway, I'll try to fit in that for next meeting. So I think we're done for today. We'll be focusing only on this. Okay. So we're done with WBS. So you should be expecting to have homework with your WBS, your scope statement, your RTM, the traceability, and the assumptions log. So 4 documents. It is based on the project that you have prepared. Okay, so we can open mic now for any questions and clarifications. If I could not address your questions or clarifications by today, I will try that one next meeting, or I'm going to send out additional references to address them. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. Any questions for today's discussion?